to the IT Matters podcast, where we explore why IT matters and matters pertaining to IT.
Todd, welcome to the IT Matters podcast. It's great to have you.
Thanks, Keith. Appreciate it. It's nice being here.
Yeah,
thanks for finding me.
You know, I'm known to find people, so it's a pleasure. I picked you out of a lot of the IT leaders that I was looking to bring on, particularly around your experience in the healthcare industry and the unique challenges that are beset upon IT leaders that are tasked with the securing sensitive patient data. And the healthcare industry is the number one target for malicious cyber criminals today. So glad to have you on. But before we dive into some of your, unique experience, Todd, can you tell our listeners a little bit about where you came from? I know you grew up in Philly. How did you get to where you are today? What's the short and sweet story of how you got to where you are?
Great question. I grew up in Philly, born and raised. I've lived there most of my life. I no longer live there. I ended up at the hospital. I was working for another company in Virginia, running their IT shop, and they were having a lot of issues regarding, sustainability, probably a lot of issues with their technology stack that I tried to fix. And this will probably play out into bigger questions later. The issue was around the problem of listening and doing. My job currently is in Wahiawa, Hawaii. I live in Charlotte, but I was out there for 2 years. I've lived here for about a year and change. There's a lot of challenges in Hawaii in general, but my job there, I got the offer when I was sort of talking to them around when COVID first started. They really needed somebody to come out there. The CFO out there is my former boss from a healthcare company I worked for in Wilmington, Delaware. He sort of picked my brain while I was with the manufacturing company in Virginia about different problems they were having at the hospital and, what my thoughts were around the hospital and sort of how I would help them. And, I tried to tell him different things and I would, we have a really good relationship. So giving him advice is not a real issue for me. So sort of told them what I thought about problems they were having, stability issues they were running into. I had no idea of the scope of the stability issues when I was having those conversations. So, I just gave him basic advice and sort of he kept calling me or emailing me and asking me for more and more advice and would I be willing to help? And I said, yeah, sure, whatever you need. So I guess it sort of went down the road. I talked to the CEO, who's now my boss. We started talking about stuff at the hospital. He was saying how dissatisfied he was with IT in general. And I, again, tried to give him advice about what I would do and how I would address things and not ever thinking for 1 second that I was going to become the first next CIO of this hospital. So I think we had like 3 conversations, and third conversation, he finally sort of said, well, I'd like to hire a CIO. I'm like, well, okay. I mean, it's a lot different than having a director, and all you've had is directors. And so here's what I think you should be looking for. And, I'm happy to help you find one. And, that's what I thought the process was going to be. I thought he just wanted to help me find their next, their first CIO. And because I never thought I would go to Hawaii. I never thought that I would, just pick up and go. And so he goes, no, you don't understand. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, no, I want you to be my CIO. And I'm like, what? I'm like, you're in Hawaii. I said, I'm in Philadelphia. Well, I was in Virginia at the time, but I'm in Virginia, in Philly. And my CIO is from Philadelphia. He's born and raised in Philadelphia too. And, the CFO, he was born and raised in Delaware. So, we all have that sort of East Coast mentality. And let me tell you, having East Coast mentality in Hawaii is a whole different animal because they're nothing like East Coast people. So
how many Hawaiian shirts did you own before you moved down there?
0. Now I own 1. They're not called Hawaii, they're called Aloha shirts. Yeah, that's what they're called. They don't call them Hawaiian shirts in Hawaii.
They're called what?
They're called Aloha shirts.
The Aloha shirts.
And that's like their version of a dress shirt in Hawaii. That's how they look at it. It's a dress shirt. So I said, well, I have to talk to my wife and I have to talk to my, we have to uproot and it'd be a big deal. And so I think we had a couple more conversations and I told my wife, and my wife's a trooper. She's the best. She'll go anywhere pretty much. And she already worked remotely, so it didn't matter to her. Her office was going to let her work from wherever she wanted to. So we decided to go. So up we went. Now, going to Hawaii is a whole different thing because I took 20 boxes of stuff with me. You don't take furniture. You just take whatever you need and then go.
I can imagine.
That's how we came back.
Of all of the places you would try to convince your wife to move to, Hawaii wasn't too hard of a sell.
Well, I didn't know how I felt about it because, the weather's great, but there's so many other factors. Moving to an island's a weird thing. And again, you're going from, the mainland. Yeah, it's a state. It does not feel like, a state. It feels like a different country. Yeah.
Yeah. From an IT and technology standpoint down there, are there any solution providers that are local to Hawaii? Any startups? I mean, is it mostly organizations that have the footprint in Silicon Valley that might have reps down there? Like, what does the environment look like from a technology solution standpoint?
I didn't have an issue finding it. There's MSPs, so I didn't have an issue finding somebody I needed, but they're all, everybody's sort of a hodgepodge, and they're not. That's going to sound weird, but like when you land in the airport in Hawaii, it's like going back in time. So, because you see phone booths, you see payphones, it's very old. There's a lot of old in Hawaii. It is beautiful, don't get me wrong, but it is a lot of old and a lot of poor, a lot of poverty. That's one of the challenges, is trying to sort of find your way. And the community I work in, the hospital, is very old. It's an older community, very impoverished. So being at the hospital, you're serving that community and you want to do the best you can because you want to help these people. That's sort of how I look at it. I mean, the technology stack in Hawaii is fine. I mean, it's no different, maybe less providers than places on the mainland, but I haven't had an issue finding people. That hasn't been an issue for me. The bigger issue is finding people to work. That's the challenge.
Are there any universities in Hawaii that have a decent computer science school?
I mean, University of Hawaii, I don't really know much about their programs and stuff. That's their biggest school.
Did you guys recruit out of University of Hawaii? Some of the
No, I found people who were like ex-military.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Just native, island people. So there's a huge military presence there. So that's why the technology is still decent.
I see. Okay. So you pack your bags. You tell the wife, hey, I've got a new job as the CIO of a.
Well, I told her I had an offer.
In an offer.
We talked about the offer, and I said, we'd have to go. And I said, what do you want to do? And she's like, okay. That was pretty much the conversation. Like, she's great. My wife is awesome.
Yeah.
I'll say that on a public, forum. She is awesome. She's not afraid to just do, and but I want to do less now because I want to just sort of stay where I am and stay grounded for a while. I'm not ready to pick up and go again. So that was my big adventure.
Well, it's good. It's good you got it out of the system. So you guys head off to Hawaii, and you are now the CIO of Wahiawa Hospital.
Wahiawa
Hospital. Mm-hmm. And what did you walk into? What did the IT team look like? What were some of the major challenges the hospital was dealing with at the time? And what were your first steps into helping solve some of those problems?
Okay, so I walked into a hospital that's, an older hospital in an older community. I remember my first day, and I sort of looked around in the data center, and I was trying to get a lay of them. My biggest problem I had was I had no documentation of any kind, nothing. So I had no idea what was where. We had to create it all. So my team, when I got there, was 2 people, and 1 person had just given their notice. Others had either left before I got there. So, or let go. So my biggest issue coming in was to sort of try to get a lay of the land and understand what I had that was good and what I had that was not so good. The problem I was running into was the network had about a 75% uptime. So it kept going down every day. Went down. How can I want to say this in a nice way. I don't want to sound harsh, but the biggest problem that I saw, and I'm a guy who grew up in infrastructure, so I understand infrastructure really well. We all grow up somewhere in IT, software, application, cloud now. I mean, it just all depends. So I came up through infrastructure. I was a network admin. I was a help desk guy. I was the lowest of the low, and now I'm where I am. And it just is what it is. So, but some people look their nose down at people from infrastructure. They think, oh, you're just infrastructure. I always say the same thing. Well, without my infrastructure, your stuff won't work. So what I saw was, I had switches that were neglected. I had servers that were neglected. I had a fairly new server instance that was built on a platform a virtual platform that I would never use. I just had a lot of stuff that wasn't really working together. And
were those the sources of the downtime? What was bringing the network down?
Yeah, the too many VLANs. The switches just couldn't handle that because switches were 12 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I would say to you that the network was in serious decline, and neglect was probably part of it. And the guy who was a director before me did a really poor job of identifying what's wrong and how to really fix it. And so my challenge was, well, how do I do a strategic assessment and a SWOT analysis while I'm trying to stabilize the network? I mean, I was in there regularly at 2 a.m. trying to get this thing working. I mean, I remember day 1, I left and then I came back at 2 a.m. and I was on the phone with people trying to figure out what's going on because I didn't know at the time the VLANs were the problem. I didn't know at the time the switches were the problem. I just got there and I'm like, what's going on? And so I brought in a friend of mine, a guy who's worked with me for the last now 10 years, to sort of help me virtually with some of the stuff. He's now my senior network admin. And I managed to find the former consulting MSP that was working with the hospital and helped design a lot of the network. So I got them and I re-engaged them, because they were fired by the guy before me. And I was like, why would he fire you if you guys have all these problems? And they're like, we don't know. So anyway, so I worked with them to get the network stable. So we got rid of about 50 VLANs. Then we had something like 125 or something. Now we have like 30-ish. I stabilized the network immediately just to sort of get it to a place where I know that it's going to stay up every day and not go down. And that's sort of how we did it over the period of however long it took us. It took us a week or so.
Why were there so many VLANs? What was the strategy around the segmentation of all of these VLANs?
I think that they thought, that the people in IT thought that you need a VLAN for everything. And that's not the way they work. So I tried to talk to the people who were there before they left, and they were all siloed, so they didn't know. And so, they did their thing and whatever that was, and just tried to sort of, again, not get involved. And I don't work that way. So to me, it was all foreign. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, why are you not involved? You're in IT. Why are you not saying something? Why are you guys not doing this? And they just didn't know how. They were never trained. So once I figured out sort of what was going on. And then I brought those consultants in, like they were on island, so I could bring them in. And I had them sort of sit in IT for like the first couple of weeks, just sort of keep things stable. I brought my network guy out, and then we started to go to work on what we're going to do to sort of fix this network. Now, wrap this all around the fact that we're in COVID. So everything, as you know, stopped. And getting stuff, procurement is really difficult. So we went to, I'll cut through it. I'll give you the short version. So we went through it, I did my analysis, and I thought to myself, and my network guy agreed, I said, we're never going to be able to fix this. Why don't we just build a brand new instance? And then we can bring that up separate from the rest of the network, move everything we need to move onto the new instance, onto the new, onto the new vSAN did it with Dell, so VxRail, and build the backups off of there and make that a whole VMware instance. And then we can figure out what to do with the second instance when we're done. And then he had some ideas, which I liked, and so we did that. And then, he's like, obviously, well, how are we going to address security? And I said, we can't address that today. So we got to fix the infrastructure before we can worry about fixing security. So we have what we have now will work for now. It just won't work long term. So once we did that, ordered all the stuff. And again, as a CIO or as anybody who runs IT, as a new person, the worst thing, at least I feel, that you can do is go to your boss, who's mine's the CEO, and bring the CFO into the conversation and say, oh, hey, by the way, I have to rip everything out and start again.
Yeah, that's it typically doesn't go over very well unless it was planned.
This was the third time I've had to have that conversation. In my last 3 out of my last 3 jobs have been this way. And I like being in that sort of fire. It's just who I am. I respond really well under pressure, and I just like working in that environment. So I had that conversation, and I said to them, this is how we're going to have to do it, and there's no way around it. There's no way I can sort of mitigate this stuff. I can make stuff more stable, as you've seen, but I can't fix neglect. And it's already too far gone, and the equipment's too old. It has to be changed out. And they listened, and they heard me, and they had a shared vision with me, and that's sort of how it's been since day one, is that we've all sort of been in sync with each other and how we want to approach, how the business wants to approach things, and how IT can help the business.
These conversations can be difficult, especially if there's not a vision of how this transformation affects the bottom line. So if the network is down, if you're up 75% of the time, and you're able to increase that to 95 or 99 or higher, what does that do to the bottom line? And does that help justify the investment in new infrastructure? Were you able to illustrate that and bits and numbers to them?
Well, yeah, I have a really good relationship with the CFO. Obviously, we worked together for a long time, so he understands where I'm coming from when I talk about things. So I don't have to get into that detail. I do. With him, I don't need to, because a lot of times before I even talk to the CEO, I'll talk to him first and sort of use him as my sort of sounding board. And I call him the bank, because that's what he is. And he'll say to me, okay, well, that makes sense, but can we do this? And I'll say yes or no. And most times it's no. And it's not no because I want to say no. It's no because it's only a way to get things done partially. The problem I have, and what I really love working for the hospital, but it's like a love-hate kind of thing. It's nonprofit. It's small as far as hospitals go. Little small 125-bed hospital. I have to stretch the dollar, 10 times around the block and then go for 11. So I love that, but I also don't love it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it provides a challenge. If you had a budget, a comfortable budget, then you just run out and you grab the solutions that you need. You grab the stack,
Right.
and then you implement it. But narrowing down where the best ROI is, what needs to happen now versus next year, on a limited budget, doing the negotiations with the vendors, making sure that you're sized properly and you're not overspending. That's a unique challenge in and of itself.
Yeah, so it's a place I love to be and a place I don't like being, because I'd rather just have the money and just go out and get it. But I'm not built that way. So I will go through vendors and we'll beat them up and we'll get my number. And we'll have to come up with out-of-the-box solutions to get things moving. So that's sort of what I did. I did all that prep work before I even had the conversation, just so I was ready with all my numbers and I had everything, which I try to do. I try to always get everything in front of me so I see it first, because there are times where I'll see something and it doesn't make any sense to me. So I'm not going to try to sell it to my boss, because if I can't justify it, how am I going to justify it to them?
You brought in all this new equipment. You stood it up.
Yeah.
I'm assuming the switching, switches and servers,
and firewalls.
Yeah. So, okay. So you stand it up, and what was the result? Like what did you see change after this new equipment was implemented?
Well, it didn't get all implemented at once. Servers were first, then the switches, and the firewalls, because I just couldn't get everything in at the same time. So luckily I was able to get the servers in pretty quick, but the switches took probably 6 to 8 weeks. Yeah, about 8 weeks. And then the firewalls around the same time. The instant notice one of the server situation was there was no more space issues. So on their old instance, they always were running into space issues because they had these, they do a lot of imaging. So they had these giant image files that were eating up tons and tons of space on the SAN, because they weren't. Again, that piece of the hospital wasn't being run correctly, but I couldn't address that until after this was done. That was when I bought the servers and all the virtual stuff, and I loaded everything up. Immediately noticed the speed increase. Immediately noticed stability. Everything runs as it should, because they're all working off of one another. That's sort of how it's supposed to work. All I care about for the users is they have up. They're up. There's not outages. You're going to have an outage for whatever reason every once in a while. But to be consistently 99% uptime is what I want. That's what I got. 99.9, whatever it is.
So, switching gears here, the healthcare industry is probably the number one targeted industry for hacking and malware, cyber criminals, because of all of the sensitive data, PII data, everything you have is HIPAA compliant. What, especially with aging infrastructure, a hospital that is running very lean, the financial situations for a lot of smaller hospitals can be quite dire at times. What do you do if you're in a situation where you have to protect all this data? What are the basics? What are let's say you were giving advice to an IT leader accepting a new job in a similar situation, and they don't have any experience in the healthcare industry. What advice would you tell them when it comes to securing the data? What are the basics? What's the next step? Where do you want to be in a few years? Are there any strategies that you found that are particular to healthcare? That's
where listening comes in and understanding what's in front of you. It's a gigantic task. And the biggest problem of being in a smaller hospital is that I don't have a CISO on my network engineer is. So it's about hands and feet. And so it's about what can I manage that will work for me on the budget that I have. So how do I make this place as robust as possible on the dollars that I have or that I can find? So that's always for me. I'm always trying to find money. I'm always trying to structure deals that work for the hospital. Instead of doing giant deals where I'm having to pay X up front. I'm breaking it down where if I can finance something for X at 5 years. So I'm just using as an example, 3 years. I would do that versus trying to do something all up front. Just, again, I'm always trying to find the best way to make it work. And I'll keep going at it until I make it work. That's the drive. So I would say to you that you have to make sure that you have good backups. You have to make sure you're backing up somewhere to some kind of offsite storage.
Did you back up to outside of Hawaii? Seems like that would make sense.
I do now.
Yeah.
But at first, when I got there were no backups.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to make sure you have something, antivirus. You got to make sure you have something that defends you from external threats. Outside, you got to make sure your endpoints are being protected. And then, for me, I made sure that I have the SIM that sits in the middle of all of my security, and aggregating all my security data, plus acts as my sort of hands and feet when I'm not in the office. That's sort of how I built out the security stack.
Did your team manage the SIM?
We manage it, yes, but when we're not in the office, they handle things. The company that I work with on the SIM.
I see. Okay, so there's you have a third party.
The company I bought the SIM from, they also do, they're monitoring me 24/7. Yes.
Yeah. Making sure that the integrations are all up to date. Right. Okay.
Right.
Endpoints, SIM, making sure you're backing up offsite. I was reading the news this morning and saw an article come across that public cloud service revenue jumped 19% this year. 45% of that are SaaS applications. 20% of that is represented in IaaS, infrastructure as a service. You've got 18% platform as a service. Microsoft is leading overall over Amazon. And as far as growth goes, I know Amazon has the bulk of the business today. And then you have GCP, probably with the smallest footprint. But what does that tell you about where the industry is going? I know that cloud, typically moving to especially a public cloud, a hyperscaler, it's not the most cost-effective option. But Microsoft is leading in the growth. I think partially, they kind of remind me of Apple, where there's an ecosystem. They're developing that ecosystem that makes it difficult to buy anything outside of Apple because you don't have all the visibility that you have within all of your other devices. If you buy an Android or you buy a PC. And Microsoft, it seems like they're adopting a similar strategy with their security stack and how you can spin up Sentinel pretty easily if you have the right licensing. And then they make it very easy to say, hey, well, why don't you back up here in Azure? And we'll, just like all the other providers, will provide some upfront funding for it. Does that surprise you about Microsoft taking the lion's share of the growth? Where do you see this going?
I mean, their products are good. I like their products. I don't deal with them because they won't give me nonprofit pricing, where Amazon does. So they lump all hospitals in the same bucket. So it doesn't matter, small, big, whatever. And there's no appeal. There's no nothing. It's their decision. And that's so to me, it's not financially feasible to work with Microsoft when Amazon said, yeah, whatever you need. I use Google because that's what the hospital had when I got there. I'd rather use 365 is what it is. I don't really like Google's public cloud. I'm not a fan of their stuff. Amazon's been good. I mean, their stuff is good. I mean, it all works for me. I have a cloud presence now where I didn't before. It's not a gigantic cloud presence, but it's something. And it's, I move more workloads up there a bit, and I have my dev up there and my backups up there. I think they're both good. You're right. Microsoft is probably trying to create that ecosystem like Apple. Their Azure Site Recovery is excellent. Azure itself is a great product. Does a lot of great things. Just my issues are strictly from a pricing perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I won't denigrate their product, but I will say that they stink when it comes to, giving nonprofit pricing or even having some kind of process. But that's seems to be the nature of the world with regard to dealing with these kinds of companies and trying to sort of have some kind of appeal process or some kind of way to talk to somebody who can get you some answers. It just doesn't exist.
Yeah, I see that as well. That's a really good point. We're coming up on time here, and Todd, what we really like to do before we conclude is, as an IT leader, if you could display a message on every billboard in the world for other folks in IT that a simple message that you find helpful, what would you tell the world of IT? What is being missed today? What do you think is a message that would bring impact to those that are leading IT today?
Be a better listener.
Be a better listener.
Yeah.
I don't think I can complain about that response.
It's easy to do. It's hard to listen and then do. But if you take a breath and stop running 500 miles an hour, actually listen to what your people are telling you. Because trust me, I do it all the time. My brain is always running. And my guys will stop me and say, what about this? What about this? Then I'll stop myself and I'll listen. And it happened yesterday. I was talking about something, and I was talking to my network guy and my senior IT guy, and I was saying, well, what do you guys think about where I'm going here? And they're like, well, I think that you could do this or that. And I'm not going to get specifics, but and my network guy said, well, no, I'd rather do this than that. And so I thought about it, and I said, okay, we'll do it that way. But a lot of IT people are very stuck in their ways and want to do it their way. Or, they're into that mode, which I hate, which is we've always done it this way. I can't stand that phrase. Then people are afraid to do it a different way. You got to be willing to adapt, to pivot, because you're not always going to be right. It's not about being right. It's about, getting it done correctly, and not about getting it done correctly your way.
It's about being adaptive.
Yeah.
Right.
Resilient, things like that. I just listen to your people, because sometimes they can really make a lot of sense. My biggest problem walking into the hospital was a perception of IT, because the thing I heard over and over again was, well, we talk to IT, their answer is always no. And so, I always said, well, no, it should never be no. It should always be yes. And if it's not yes, it should be, well, let me find out and I'll get back to you. That's sort of how I broach the listening. Like, if you don't listen, then what's the point? If you're going to bull through and try to get things done, you might, but will it be the right way to do it? Will it align with the business needs? I don't know. I don't think so. It's like, it's not my stuff. That's how I look at it. None of this is my stuff. Like, people think like you're in IT. Oh, you just, you get all the toys, you get to do it your way. And I'm like, it's not my stuff. It's the hospital stuff, or it's whoever you're working for. It's their stuff. All I am is the caretaker for the stuff. It's not mine where I have, like, I'm just going crazy on the keyboard. Hey, look what I can do. It's not the way it works. All we are drivers we are a business driving entity. That's it. It's not black magic. It's just IT.
I think that's an excellent note to leave on is how important IT is to the business. And you're right, it's not your stuff. It's the organization that you work for, and your job is a lot of times viewed as a gatekeeper, but it should be viewed as an enabler. And I think if more IT leaders listen instead of dictate and speak, then it's easy to bring that reputation to a change. Where can people find you, Todd? If some of our listeners would like to reach out and pick your brain,
I'm on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Okay. Well, we'll add your LinkedIn to the show notes here. Todd, really appreciate your time today. And
sure, thank you very much. Really appreciate you having me. It was really a great conversation.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And look out for the episode, and we'll catch you next time.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. The IT Matters podcast is produced by Upcalla, an IT advisory firm that helps businesses navigate the vast and complex IT marketplace. Learn more about Upcalla at opkalla.com.